Recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet. This is episode 54 of Registry Matters. Well, good evening, Larry, on this odd Monday night. How are you?
Well, doing fantastic. Had a great weekend. Worked hours and hours over the weekend working on a major project.
Can you divulge said project?
Probably would not be good because it's dealing with personnel issues.
Oh. Did you happen to see that big honking storm that went across the United States over the weekend?
I was aware of it vaguely. I did hear that there were some massive flight cancellations, particularly some southern airports where you don't expect that. No kidding. I have a picture of the North Carolina state line sign as I was in, I guess it would be Virginia, and I sat on the interstate for 3 hours. It took me 17 hours to drive home yesterday. It should have taken me 11 or 12 hours. Good times. Really good times. Well, did you learn anything from the experience? I learned that I didn't have to change my shower head at the hotel. And why did you not have to change it? Did you find the flow to be sufficient? It was very much the flow was sufficient. I didn't need a prostate exam. I didn't have to worry about any of that. The flow was sufficient. But would you have been prepared had the flow not been sufficient? I would 100% not been prepared. I was perfectly like, hey, if it comes out just as a little spit, I guess I'm just going to have a little spit coming out for a shower. Well, but see, the listeners don't realize that you've had to compromise when you were in the United States Navy. They're very the vessels are very restrictive in terms of water. So I'm assuming that and other experiences in your life have adjusted your expectations in terms of water usage. There is one called Prison that did a really good number. Actually, I was never on the ship, so that's for a different conversation too. I was waiting for the Prison one because I know that they have some massive restrictions. They try to keep the tiers from being flooded, and they try to keep consumption down, and the buttons only last for like 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And they have all these things. So then you steal a fork from the chow hall and you cram that thing in there, and then the water just stays on forever. I've heard of that. Yeah, there was at one place, whatever. It was the way it was set up. There was one entrance to the side, and then it was just an open shower. So if you were to go in there and you were in the first one, you've got someone walking up straight behind you, but you could end up like way there in the corner. So now this just turned into like a one-person shower is how the rules of the game had come up. But there were 4 shower heads in there, 3 or 4 shower heads in there. And then the hot water one, the one there at the end had a ton of pressure, and you just cram your fork in there and it just ran forever. Or modern facilities have it where you can cram it all you want to, but it kicks out after a certain amount of time, and the cramming doesn't keep it on. So it must have been an older version of a facility. They don't have the only new ones in Georgia are private facilities. I'm going to assume, the Geo and the, what the heck's the other one? CCA. Those are going to be the only new ones in the state. I think the CCA has changed their name now. I think they're Core Civic or something else, but I agree with you. Yeah. Well, let's do something here, and being December and the holiday season, let's thank our patrons. And this is the Hall of Fame roster. So these are the people for all of humanity have contributed to the podcast, helping to keep it going. And we have Matthew and Shantae and Hal and Laura, Brian, Ellen. Alexa just wanted to chime in and speak to me too. Laura, and then Brian, Ellen, Christy, David, Tim, Christian, Jane, Jennifer, Suzanne, Mr. Anonymous, Michael, Hank, Patty, Gerald, Dave, Horace, Justin, and our all-time Hall of Famer. And who is that? Well, you got to try to beat him if you want to. Good luck trying. And that is Thomas. And thank you all so very much. We really appreciate it. And especially the time of the year, it's the season of giving. So very much appreciate it. So the Hall of Famer. Yep. I'm going to try to beat that. I'm going to up my donation. Okay. And the second place person is about 4 times lower than his. So for whatever that's worth, whatever you want to do with that information, there you go. It's extremely gratifying that anybody would support us at the level they do, and it's humbling, and we're just so thankful that people put a value of what we're doing. If it's $1 a month or $5 a month or whatever it is, at least our effort is being recognized as having value, and that's greatly appreciated.
Kick in a buck, man. That's all you got to do, and we will love you forever. I also want to tell you, and I don't know if this is the direct contributor to it or not, but I started running Google ads, and our downloads are up by like twofold and the episode's only been out for a little bit less than a week, actually. It released a little bit late because of my travels last week, but so I don't know. We're getting about 100 more visits per day. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what's doing it. I'm excited about it nonetheless.
I think it's probably Hank and his support groups.
That's very possible. So, hey, thank you, Hank. And also send me more pictures of blue balls doing interesting things. Actually, you know what I should have done while I was stuck in traffic yesterday? I should have had blue balls all over the snow and all that stuff. That would have been, I mean, I was driving like 30 and 20 miles an hour on the interstate. It was ridiculous.
Well, if you were in the Atlanta metro, that's you'd be very proud to be able to drive 20 or 30 on the interstates during
that's true.
During rush
that would
hours.
Be an improvement. That's true. That's true. Well, hey, so this first article comes from the Washington Post, and I wanted to put it in there because it's you've got to get your propeller hat on. But neuroscientist thinks one way to fight opioid addiction is to tackle loneliness, and I just think that this is tangentially related to us in that if you flip the logic around, the reason why people are on opioids is because of loneliness. So people on the registry are like forced into isolation. They're probably going to find a way to get an out, whatever that is, whether they choose opioid, whether they choose some other deviant behavior, whatever. It just feels to me like the way that the registry is built with the restrictions, curfews, and all that stuff, with all those supervision and restrictions, that it forces you into isolation, and you're going to go look for a way to resolve that loneliness somehow, some way.
Well, I would say possibility, but explain this to me. How is it that as we've evolved over the last 60 years, if you look at the American family and how they would have lived in the 1950s, and everybody had a front porch, particularly if you were in the southern half of the United States, you had a front porch, and there was extreme efforts to be social and friendly. Now we do everything. I mean, when's the last time you've seen a front porch? I think in a house built in the last 30 years, you'd be hard pressed to find one. Back porches have all but vanished. Nobody wants to have any direct contact. Everybody wants to text. Nobody wants to have a verbal conversation. Could it be that you're lonely because that's the have we imposed this loneliness on ourselves by deliberately choosing to avoid human contact? Is that a possibility?
I definitely think that is a thing. And also, but you know that people, if they try and help the neighbor, then they get involved, and there's all that baggage of being involved. So like, hey, look, I'm going to buy my house in suburban, whatever, and I don't even want to know my neighbors because they're all crazy, and I don't want to get involved.
Right. But all the socialization skills I see have eroded as far as having conversations. No one talks to anybody anymore. I'm the Lone Ranger that'll actually call people back from Narcel. I know that they usually get mad and hang up on me because of the way I present myself, but I will actually call.
When you tell people they're stupid for the way they think, they're not going to like it. I'm just saying.
I don't do that, but I don't give them hope in most cases of the situation they're in. I'll give an example. A guy contacted us about. He's a dual Canadian U.S. citizen, and he wants to, I think we published this as a matter of fact, but he wants to, after serving his prison stint in Tennessee, he wants to go back to Canada, where his support structure is, and Tennessee won't let him go. And he sent me his paperwork. He filed pro se, and I haven't had a chance to talk with him yet, but I can tell you one of the biggest problems is he did it pro se. He did the best job a pro se person can do, but it's not good enough. And so I have to be the bad guy. I have to tell him I can either do one or two things. I can say, you did a marvelous job putting this together, and the system is corrupt, and therefore there's nothing you could have done better. Or I can say, you did a marvelous job putting this together, but the system really isn't very sympathetic to pro se litigants, and you don't have the access to the backside of this where you guys can go in and talk to the judge and try to explain the situation like your attorney could do. And I'm in a conundrum because I can't help him if I don't tell him what's wrong. And if I tell him what's wrong, then he gets mad at me. And what's wrong is that he's pro se. That's not the only thing that's wrong, but that's the biggest barrier towards moving his situation towards a more satisfactory outcome, is he's not going to be able to do what needs to be done pro se.
I completely understand.
Well, I have to be a bad guy. How do I do that? How do I do that? Tell him that your chances of success are extremely low if you continue on this course you're on, although I sympathize with the battle you're trying. Who in their right mind would want to be paying hotel rent in Tennessee where they have little connection, and they have connection and they have family and they have dual citizenship in Canada? Of course, that would make the most sense.
It would make the most sense, and it would seem that the United States would be like, good riddance, don't come back.
That would be my position if I were in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. I would be wanting to know, but the problem is I don't know enough about international transfers. I'm somewhat of an expert in domestic transfers, but I don't know how we deal with offenders who need to be supervised out of the country and what that process would look like if there is one. So I can't really advise him on that, but I can tell him one thing, that if it was specifically clear in his plea agreement that he would be able to go to Canada, he has a cognizable claim that the state is failing to perform their part if they are refusing to attempt to let him go to Canada. But there's not much more I can do because he needs an attorney to work with this. And I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to call him in the next day or two and tell him, you're probably not going to get a lot of traction until you get legal counsel. And of course, he has no money because he's living in a hotel. It's catch-22.
And all that to come around that we were talking about loneliness and the breakdown. I don't know if you want to call it a breakdown, just the change
I was making a point that I should call people back. I like interacting with people. And I do that even though after I interact with people, sometimes they're disappointed after what I've told them. But yes, we don't want to interact. When's the last time you've seen anyone under 25 engage in a voice telephone call?
I don't want to talk on the phone. I'm not under 25. I don't want to talk on it either.
Well, that's my point. So how can you claim you're so lonely when you don't want to talk to anybody?
Yeah, it's just different. I don't know. I totally understand your point, but you don't have to talk on the phone to have interactions. My point here is that the registry really imposes some heavy isolation tactics on you.
It does. It absolutely does.
I mean, the people up in like the Gainesville area, Hall County, they have a 5 o'clock in the evening curfew. You get off work at 5 o'clock and maybe you're allowed to go to the grocery store or something just to get a little extra cushion in there, but you get some food and then you come straight home. Now you're just stuck sitting on the couch watching Big Bang Theory and Cops, I guess. I mean, that's like imposed isolation. So then you're going to turn to whatever vices you can come up with.
That's true. And we have that same situation here with early curfews. They get progressively later, as late as 9 o'clock. But we have that same situation here. And people are very much isolated while they're under supervision. They have to get permission to have a romantic relationship here.
It's ridiculous. They do here too. If they have a child under the age of 18.
Well, here it goes beyond that. You have to have permission to have a relationship of a romantic nature if you're on sex offender supervision.
And so that's parole or probation. And your guys is kind of short-ish,
Not
right?
Really. No.
Is the longest like 20 years or something?
Well, it's indeterminate. It's 5 to 20.
That's right. That's right. Indeterminate.
So, and then there's a kabuki process that people go through to try to get off, and very few get off of parole, particularly probation. A lot more get off because that's judicial determination. But yeah, it's a very flawed process we're trying to clean up in the legislature.
Okay.
But there's not a lot of support for making it easier for sex offenders not to be under supervision. It's just difficult when you go out seeking legislative support for a person to say, I got you on that one. I'm going to go out and tell my constituents that I'm making that a priority to see if we can get sex offenders off supervision.
I think it should be easy, right?
Yeah, to go to a community event and when they take public comment, stand up and say that and see how much applause you get.
Well, here's an article from the Marshall Project that's I'm not really sure what we should do with this one overall, though, is if you have dysfunctional parents, shouldn't the kids be put someplace else So the title of the article is How Incarcerated Parents Are Losing Their Children Forever. I guess there's a bazillion colors of gray in between on how quote unquote bad mom and dad are before you should put the kids, remove them from foster care and actually take away the kids, take away the parents' rights to the kids. There's a lady profiled who did some, I guess it's a FEMA fraud and did a couple stints in prison, and she's just been like banished from ever seeing her children again. And I think it's kind of shitty, but I think there's good intent in there. I struggle with how do you actually say, nope, you made them, but you can't have them anymore.
Who's the kook that put this in here? Did I put this one in?
I think I grabbed this one, honestly.
Oh, okay. Because I was trying to remember if I was the kook that did this.
No, I think you only put in then one article.
Having been in the foster care system for the better part of 10 years, I can say that it runs the gamut from good and bad parents that take on foster children. If you're incarcerated, obviously it's going to diminish your ability to take care of your children.
Yeah.
But since I don't think they allow children to stay with their parents in prison. So
that would be pretty neat, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Get the children wing over there or something.
So it says female prisoners whose children are 5 times more likely than those of male inmates to end up in foster care have their rights taken away most often. Well, that goes without saying.
Of course.
If the women are still the primary caregivers in society and they go to prison, you're going to have a lot fewer guys taking over the slack. Where the vice versa, when the guy goes to prison, women, since they're traditionally more the caregiver, I'm not saying that's the way it should be, that's the way it is be.
I understand that.
It stands to reason that there would be more, but what's the issue when they come out? When do they get to attempt to be reunited? It says from 91 to 2007, the number of imprisoned parents has skyrocketed. Of course, so has the prison population from 357,000 to 2.2 million.
Mm-hmm. And then go down 2 paragraphs and read the Hillary Clinton one.
Hillary Clinton's vocal support. Congress passed the Adoption of Safe Families Act. That one?
Yep.
Which mandated that federally funded state child welfare programs begin termination of parental rights in most cases in which children have been in foster care for 15 of the previous 22 months. The measure's supporters hoped it would pave the way for adoption. Now, see, I'm going to come down differently than most liberals on this. Having been in foster care,
right?
Having been from a dysfunctional family myself, I tend to lean in that direction because the younger the child is, the more adoptable they are. And in my case, they held out all this ridiculous hope that my parents were both going to magically become better parents. And by the time they decided to do the permanent termination of parental rights, we were all too old. I was like right. Between 12 and 13. When's the last time you've seen a 12 or 13-year-old get adopted?
Right. And I mean, I don't want to make the crude similarity, but at the pound, when you go adopt a pet, like the cute little puppy always gets adopted, but the 15-year-old one that's got cancer and so like that dog's never going to get adopted. It's the same thing. You want the new hotness, as it was said in a movie, not old and busted. Sorry, Larry, you were old and busted.
I was. I mean, 12, you're over the hill. Foster children younger than 2 years old are considered to be the most critical attachment age of development, which I agree with that.
Sure.
So
now this is again. I mean, send me all the emails. So it's Larry at. This is very much the same as the abortion debate. Then what do you do with all the? I don't like access. No, that's not the right word. What do you do with all of the unplanned pregnancies that are coming out? It's the same argument on that side of it too, and it feeds right into the foster care system.
Well, I would tend to come down on the if the person, you have to take the totality of the circumstances. If someone's being sent away for 20 to life, and the earliest they can be paroled is 20, and they've got a 2-year-old, why do you need to try to figure out anything? Because that child is going to be an adult before that parent is at the earliest eligibility date. So I would come down of an individual analysis of each sentence and how you would deal with termination of parental rights. But I would like for children to be adopted when they're adoptable. It makes no sense to wait till they're teenage and then say, well, I guess we're going to have to take them out of foster care and see if they can be adopted. Well, then they're in long-term foster care until they age out, and then they age out in a way that is very non-supportive, because very few parents just cut their kids off. But in the foster care system, that's exactly what happens. When you reach age 18, the check that goes to that foster family ends. And it would be the rarest of foster parents that say, well, I've kind of gotten attached to this kid, so I'm going to keep supporting them and taking care of them and helping them transition to adulthood. They don't do that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. There's got to be one out there somewhere where it does happen. But in most instances, you're told to pack it up. And that's a very abrasive move from being at a home to being totally independent, and there's no transition. Those things are not healthy for us as a society. And I know I'm one of those sitting here saying that maybe we need to have more governmental transition assistance for people who've been in long-term foster care, because in a normal family, they would have that transition assistance. Very few parents that I know of, and I'm 60 years old now, I don't know of many parents when they reach their 18th birthday, they come home and they find their suitcases outside. When you turned 18, did you find your suitcase outside?
No, I sure didn't.
Well,
let me add this in. Laura's listening to us record this over on the Discord live stream, and she says that she knows that if a mom has a kid in prison, that they'll let them stay with mom for 12 months. But that's a federal. I'm pretty sure states don't do that.
They'll let them stay with mom, you mean in the prison?
Yeah. That's what she says. Newborns can stay with mom in prison for 12 months, she says she thinks.
Oh, if they're born in prison, yes. If they're born, if they give birth in prison, okay. But I'm not aware of being allowed to take your kid with you to prison.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I can just see you're like 16-year-old, you're like getting them dressed to go to school and whatnot, bringing them through the chow to make sure they have a nice square meal on their way to school. School bus picking up the kids at the Sally Port. That's awesome.
Oh, well, that'd be fantastic.
And then the next article that we have is from law.com, and it's down there below the show notes. Lessons from California and New Jersey bail reform legislation. We have covered this, I guess this was maybe 6-ish months ago, but we've covered bail a bunch of times about eliminating cash bail. And I was reading through this, and there's some things in there that are kind of interesting that so I get, you get locked up and you can post bail and maybe you're out in 6 or 12 hours. But I guess in New Jersey, like you're going to stick around for 3 days regardless. So you could be millionaire and you have the funds and could be out instantaneously, or you could be Mr. Broke person and hey, you're both going to stick around for 3 days. A particular quote that I pulled out of it though, said, I guess I didn't move this comment around, but the, Albert Hirsch, a California public defender, says, I predict that many judges as well as prosecutors will formulate new methods to keep defendants in custody. So that's good times.
No.
I know, right?
Right. Well, I have mixed emotions on this one as well. I don't magically think that if a person has money, that somehow or another that they are going to be less likely to commit a crime. Right. That in and of itself. Right. Because most of the time, the money that's posted is someone else's. When you make the phone call, you're calling up dad, you're calling up somebody and saying, will you come down and bail me out? You're not usually saying,
that's fair. That's legit. Somebody's mortgaging their house, whatever. Right.
Right. So there is money at stake, but it often isn't yours. If it were your money at stake and the fact that you were going to lose that money if they revoked your bail because you violated conditions of release, I would say that would be a powerful incentive, but I'm not convinced on how much of an incentive that is. So I do see the disparity that exists. If a person has the ability to raise a $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 bail, they're out. And the person who has the exact same offense, assuming that there was no difference in they drove to the local Kroger store, they took their car and they rammed it through the plate glass window, like happened next door here a few days ago, and they had the same criminal history points. Then the person who couldn't raise the $20,000 has to sit in jail. Is it an enormous disadvantage? I get all of that, but the problem that goes with all this is that in order to be so-called fair, is they have to put these people through a bureaucracy, through some sort of examination to do the scoring and the evaluations. And depending on where they score in points, then they have to go see a judicial official before they can be released under what non-monetary conditions they can be released, which usually means something that's very costly that they have to pay for. There's problems with it. It's not a perfect solution. Does it get us to a more fair system? Possibly, but it's not the cure-all, end-all with bail. There are people who will be losers in this, and that's what you just described. The person who is ready to make bail, has a job to go to, and they can't make bail because they have to sit in jail for 3 days. And the job says, well, we consider you abandoned your job on the third day, so you're out of here.
Right. And, if you grew up in Brokeville, having a, $250 bond could be too much. If you grow up in super duper rich neighborhood, then $2 million might not be enough. I think that's why we have judges, isn't it? So they could make individualized determinations of things.
Well, that is, but what happened is that bail schedules came into existence without any consideration for the ability to pay. There were judges here, for example, that would look at the maximum fine that could be imposed, and they'd say, okay, you got 3 4th-degree felonies, that's $1,000 maximum fine, so your bail is this amount. And that what kind of individual determination is that?
Right. Right.
But it takes time to do individual analysis of what is the proper conditions to release people under, and what will be enough to secure their participation so that they have an incentive to show up and participate. And to refrain from criminality, you have to build some kind of structure. A person is repetitively with domestic violence and can't stay away from someone they're obsessed with and they're stalking. You would probably have to build more conditions of restraint around that person, even if they could post a significant bond, because they're likely to go out and intimidate and harass the witness to try to kill the proceeding, which is not fair in that setting to the state. If the witness intimidation takes place, then the state doesn't get a fair shot to put on its case to show that the person did the violence.
Yeah, and so it doesn't really matter how much money is involved. I guess that happens with like mob and cartels. Wasn't Manafort allegedly tampering with witnesses while he was locked up?
He was.
Oh no, wait, no, that's why he ended up getting his bail revoked. Yes, that's how he got.
That's how he got. He got locked. And so you notice, I've realized that unlike the victims advocates, I'm sitting here on this podcast saying the state is supposed to be treated fairly also. And
yeah, sure.
Let me know when you hear the victims advocates say that it's supposed to be fair.
Of course.
The people is who actually brings the charges. When people offend, they're not offending against the victim. The victim is a mere witness. The crime is against the people. And
I'm with you.
The people collectively decided the bounds of an orderly society and what we want and what we will accept in behavior. When there's an infraction, that's a crime against the people. And the people deserve to have a fair day in court when there's an allegation made. But the accused also deserves a fair day in court and with a due process that works for them. I will advocate for both. The police officer that's accused of misconduct deserves the presumption of innocence and a robust defense, just like the accused that the police bring into custody. The only difference is you won't ever hear the police say that. When they accuse someone and they do their perp walk, they will never walk up to that microphone and say, these are mere allegations. There's another side that you haven't heard yet, and we would ask you to keep an open mind until that process is complete. When you hear a police official do that and say that, you let me know, and I want to put that on this podcast. Yeah,
no, I'm totally with you on that one. I'm a fan of the sciencey things, and a bunch of allegations came out in the last week about Neil deGrasse Tyson. There are these allegations that he's done the things. And I'm like, why doesn't he get a fair shake? He's just going to be accused and tried and convicted in public opinion. And now you take down one of the best science communicators of our time. And he doesn't get his fair shake. I'm with you. But I think it's a really subtle piece of the puzzle, but it says the people, the state or whatever against the person. It's not the victim against the accused, it's the state against the accused. And I'm still trying to come up with the right dialogue to describe it, but the witness is, the victim is just a cog in the wheel. Like the knife is a piece of evidence. The victim is the alleged victim. The accuser is than just like the knife, just a piece of the machinery.
That's not what the victim's advocates tell you, but that is correct. The victim of a crime is a witness against the individual. And all these special arrangements we've made that have put them in a category that's not where the system was designed by the founding fathers. And we've talked about that before. This is supposed to be difficult to convict people. The government has enormous disproportionate resources against the average citizen. When you're going to put someone in a cage, it is supposed to be hard.
Right.
And I don't know what's so hard about that for it to be understood. It is supposed to be difficult when you're trying to cage someone like an animal.
Because someone wouldn't accuse someone else of doing something heinous unless they had done the heinous thing.
All righty. That answers it.
I mean, and no, I don't believe, but I mean, it's like you just feel like, wow, I really feel for the victim. You just have some sort of
I do feel for them. Yeah, it's unfortunate that there are mean people out there who do ugly things. But the reality is, it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt and through a fair process. And if we can't do that, that person gets to walk away. And they get to walk away until we do a good job putting on a case against them.
Yep. So this article comes from The Hill, and Trump tells McConnell to let Senate vote on criminal justice reform. Oh, and I was just on my little rant about how much news and there's just constant, what's the word I'm looking for? There's just, this is being talked about constantly. And you've got Turtlehead Mitch McConnell holding this thing up, and Tom Cotton, who is like throwing in, I guess I'll call it a nuclear option, because the sex offenders might get out of prison, like 50 sex offenders might get out of prison earlier than expected. So these two guys are holding it up, and everyone else is trying to push this through. And it's a kind of modest version of a criminal justice reform bill.
That's what I read by all accounts. And it's very modest. And I think President Trump realizes that it's going to be more difficult to get the more liberal House to go along with such a modest version. And it's going to be more difficult to get a more conservative Senate to go along with a more robust version of reform. So Trump realizes that if he doesn't get this through this year, it may not get through during his first term.
Yeah. So then both sides are going to pull it further towards their side of it. So the left is going to pull it harder to the left, and then the right's going to pull it harder to the right. And then there's no chance of anything. I'm going to use the word, and you're going to scold me for it. Bipartisan agreement.
Well, that's what this is right now. But you've got a House right now until December 31st that's under Republican control. And there's a 40-seat shift in January when they swear in the new House. And the people who won those Democratic races are much more progressive than a traditional Democrat. And they're going to look at this bill and say, why bother? It does so little. Why bother? Now, I would take what I can get, because I'm a realist, and I take what I can get. So if I could get this through, I would take it as a beginning. But it's going to be more difficult, because if they push for where they want to be, which is real reform, then the more conservative Senate, which has two more Republicans, is going to be harder to get them to go along with what comes out of the House. So it's going to be difficult to bridge and have a bipartisan compromise. Bipartisanship has happened on this, and that's what's frustrating the president. It's what's frustrating the senator, like we had played the clip twice now from South Carolina. We've played him saying they're frustrated about this. Bipartisanship has in fact happened, but they can't get to the finish line because of parliamentary maneuvering. But bipartisanship is not always a good thing. If that's where you're headed with this, bipartisanship can be a bad thing.
Can you backtrack just for a second? Parliamentary maneuvering.
There's rules in the Senate that allow things, and I'm not an expert on rules in the Senate, but the Senate is allowed, it's designed to be slow and methodical and to give an enormous amount of power to each one of the 100. And those levers are not available in the House of Representatives. But the Senate is designed, like, for example, they used to have those sheets that if a federal judge was appointed and the senator of that state didn't sign one of those blue sheets, or whatever they called them, green sheets, to say move this nominee along, they didn't do that. Well, in terms of the parliamentary debate, now ultimately Mitch can end it by simply breaking the filibuster, because a filibuster only takes 60 votes, and according to Senator Graham from South Carolina, would have 80 votes, so they could break the filibuster. which was done through what's called a cloture vote. That means they could vote cloture and put this thing to a vote. But I guess they're entitled to a certain number of hours of filibuster before they can do cloture. And McConnell doesn't want to devour a lot of time on this. And so he's pushing back and saying, I'm trapped because these holdouts. As I said previously, in this article, go read the article and see who the holdouts are. Cotton is one. There's several other. They're all Republicans. Contact them if you live in their states, particularly. But if you don't live in their states, tell them it's good for the country and contact these people. I have a hard time. My senators are both on the right side from my state, and I can't contact anybody. But I guess I could do the same thing. I could call Cotton's office, but the obstruction is coming from the conservatives, not the liberals. And since we have a lot of conservative listeners, I would encourage them to try to get their colleagues on board.
Right. And maybe they don't want it. Maybe they don't want this. Maybe they want the leaner version, the one that does less.
Well, it's kind of hard to get much less because it's already been trimmed down from what the description is. This is very much a compromise already.
Right. No, you just use that term, parliamentary maneuvering, but maybe you don't know it so much at the federal level. I realize, you work a lot at the state level, but I mean, the same thing exists at the state level. It's just, colored differently, or it's something, right?
It all legislative processes. They're designed not to have mob rule. There's checks and balances, and they're designed for slowing things down. If we just had a majority vote on everything, that we would have a government that nobody would be happy of, because emotions would drive the day. So there are processes deliberately in place to keep things from going too fast when it's responding. The Senate is supposed to be the most deliberative body of all of our branches, all of our institutions of government. At one time, we didn't even directly elect senators because they were supposed to be so insulated from the mob. But I can't explain all the procedures that Senator Cotton or any holdout has available to them. But I know that there are things that they can do parliamentary wise to obstruct. And see, they're on a countdown clock. They've got to raise the national debt. They've got to enact more spending bills because we're running on a continuing resolution again, which is second or third time. The fiscal year started October 1st, and the Republicans always criticize the Democrats for not being able to pass a budget. Well, when they're in office, they have the same difficulty trying to enact a budget before the fiscal year starts. So they've got a lot of work to do, and allowing the days to be exhausted through laborious debate about something is just not something that's very appealing to the majority leader. And I can understand where he's coming from. He's trying to get the affairs that have to be done before the end of the year. And he doesn't
I guess with Christmas coming up, they only have 10 days left, maybe?
Well, they can come back after Christmas, but who wants to?
Of course. But
so
there's that.
I'm commending the president for doing what he was urged to do by Senator Graham. He's calling for a vote. That's all he can do. He's not a dictator. He's asked for a vote, and he's been public about it. So there's really not that much more he can do. If we get a vote, we get a vote. If we don't, we don't.
I mean, I actually just lost my senses for a second. I went unconscious. Did you just say you're commending the president
on this issue for calling for a vote? He did what Senator Graham asked him to do 2 weeks ago on Meet the Press. He's said he would like to see us voted on. He's expended a small amount of political capital to try to get it done, and that's a good thing. I'm not in the category of never finding anything good. It's hard to find anything I agree with, but I agree with this, and when I agree with him, I give credit. And I agree with him on this. I agree with him on the Secretary of Education's rewriting of how they handle campus sexual investigations. So
I don't even know how to set this one up, to be honest with you. And so we're just going to kind of wing it and see where it goes. But Florida Senate president's new job with private prison operator doesn't surprise advocates. This is out of the Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Times. And you got a guy that was sitting on the Senate, and he is now a very high ranking person with the GEO group, one of the private prison groups. And there were a bunch of bills that were going through while he was in office, and he was extending extra funds down the path for these private prisons. And hey, we just gave a big budget increase to the prison system, to give pay raises. The next go around, he makes sure that they get some extra money down their path so they could pay their officers better too. And now he's sitting there, the outgoing one. So I guess we can kind of go from here on how much he's getting paid. He's replacing a guy named John Bolfin, who earned $514,000 last year and is getting a $1.7 million retirement bonus. So here he's going from the Florida State Senate into something on the order of a $500,000 a year job.
So, well, the new incomer, when Republican Stewart became Senate President in 2016, the company gave him to his political action committee $270,000. When his wife ran for Congress, they shelled out Jill we're talking about shelled out another $100,000 to her losing cause. So I threw this in here just kind of to let people know that these huge donations are coming in from these prison operators. And when President Trump got elected, he promised that he would reverse the trend on deprivatization that the Obama administration had done at the federal level. And this is just an example of why that's not good public policy. Not that I'm just looking to single out Trump for something, but if you're ready to award big federal contracts, in this case we're talking about the state of Florida, but if you're ready to award big federal contracts to these private operators, that's going to cause a lot of campaign cash to flow your way. And we don't necessarily get the best public policy when people are donating, when companies are donating that have a direct benefit from what's happening here. And this is Florida's going to privatize more and more of its prisons because they're a big believer in privatization in Florida. They believe that the private sector can do everything better, so they're going to have more and more private prisons. And
let me float my own personal observation on this subject. It does seem like I would agree with the concept that private can do something more efficient because they have an economic incentive to try and cut waste and so forth. On this subject, and possibly this subject alone, I do not think that is the best way to handle it because you're talking about human beings. And if you try to make it quote unquote more efficient, then, well, let's see, what's the most expensive thing? Probably medical expenses. Food would be another one. So you're going to have to skimp on those things, not to be wasteful on the other side of it, but you have to squeeze it. So now people get a little bit less food. Maybe you cut back. Maybe this person, maybe they're not quite so as diabetic as we thought they were. So you start cutting back on the different medicines. And these are human beings. You understaff the prison just a little bit. You maybe pull 10% down, fewer officers. Now there's less yard call. There's less prison programs available to them to try and get them to not come back. I just think that this feels backwards to me.
Now, you're not sitting here on this podcast today telling me that a private company would have any desire to do anything that's not in the interest of a prisoner or the prisoners, that they would see profits as more important. I cannot believe that you would suggest something, and I'm very disappointed in you.
I deeply, deeply apologize. Facebook has a fiduciary responsibility to their stockholders, not the users of Facebook. Google the same. Every private company, that is who their loyalty is the stockholders. I mean, that's in the architecture of what a corporation is that they are beholden to returning profits to the shareholders.
I'm actually being facetious, but
I know, I totally know you are. I know I'm playing along with it. I'm just, I know, I totally understand that. I don't know if I could even extend this argument out to anything else. Garbage disposal. Sure, let a private company come pick up the garbage from your street. I just don't maybe if you based the private prison system on a recidivism rate, hey, what is your recidivism rate? Oh, hey, you have a better recidivism rate being lower. You have better outcomes of it. Yeah, you get the contract. I mean, that's how we generally award contracts to government contractors, like defense contractors who can do the best. I mean, we don't want our soldiers going to combat with faulty weapons, right?
And I agree. I want to correct how I set this up. He's the outgoing president. Yes. So I think I may have misspoke, but he's the outgoing president of the Florida Senate.
No, you didn't. I don't think you did.
Okay. Well, I don't want people to say, well, he's just picking on, but he's got a good job, and the company had given him $270,000 to his political action committee, which he doled out. And And last year, the Senate quietly inserted an extra $3 million in a no-bid contract to the Geo Group. Do you see any connection there? People always say that old adage, follow the money.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what Will in Tennessee, that's what he keeps bringing up.
Oh, well, but time will say. We've been disappointed with our private prison operations here, and we've come to realize that it was not wise public policy to give that. I think we had 44% of our beds were under private management.
Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, both of those companies are $1 billion per year industries,
multi-billions.
And that comes right off the backs of taxpayers. It's like, God.
Those are the same people who will tell you that they did it all themselves, that the government has never done anything for them. They will take great pride in saying, I did this all myself.
Absolutely.
You remember the name Dick Cheney?
I think I've heard of him. Didn't he shoot somebody? Sorry. That's probably a bad joke.
So, but yes, when he became vice president, just to remind everybody, he headed the search committee, and he was able to find himself after he did a nationwide search looking for vice presidential candidates. When they won 2000 election after the Supreme Court stopped the counting, he proudly proclaimed he did it all himself, and he was working for the big oil company that does exploration. The name's escaped me at the moment, but he said that he did it all himself. They had just got through extinguishing all those fires in Kuwait and all the billions of dollars that were paid through government contracts. And I always wonder when these people say they did it all themselves, what mirror they're looking in, because oftentimes a little bit closer scrutiny, they realize that they didn't do it all themselves.
Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact us at registrymatterscast@gmail.com. Call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. To support Registry Matters on a monthly basis, head to patreon.com/Registry Matters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at iTunes or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about us. We want to send out our big, heartfelt support for those on the registry. And don't forget to say, fuck you people. You fucking matter. You make it possible. All right. This one I found on Twitter just before we started recording. And it's from Fox 61. And State Sentencing Commission considers controversial changes to sex offender laws. And beautifully, I split this up into 3 different audio clips for us to have a little conversation about. And here we go.
Sentencing Commission held a public hearing on potential legislative reforms. The recommendations that they are considering come after a 2-year study. Connecticut's sex offender laws may change.
With this topic, you're guilty once you're accused. Right? Let's not kid ourselves. Right? A fair day in court is non-existent.
Joseph DeBrow, the president of the Center for Rational Justice Studies, told Fox 61 he wants to see the state sex offender registry board include medical professionals.
When you use the same people that made the laws, prosecuted the individuals, incarcerated them, supervised them, that's the definition of tyranny.
The Sentencing Commission recommends the state move from a conviction-based offender registry to one that focuses on how likely the person is to reoffend. Connecticut is one of the only states that doesn't allow people to appeal to be removed from the registry, which can lead to trouble getting a job or housing.
A lot of subsidized housing prevents people who are on lifetime sex offender registries from accessing those housing resources.
I think there's 2 or 3 things that we could cover there. Did anything jump out at you as something you want to tackle right off the bat?
Well, I'm not sure I agree that it's one of the few states that don't allow a removal process, but I don't have the data in front of me, but I believe it's much more common than the reporter.
That was one of the first things I was hoping you would address is that even a factual statement?
I don't believe it to be factual. I believe that there are some states that have processes that are very flawed and very few get removed. And California will soon join that group when they have their flawed process that they passed into law. I think it takes effect in 2019. Very few will get off, but I think it's very common where you have where there are states where you just simply time out. And you don't have a process, but the process is there that when you reach 10 years, you exit, or when you reach whatever number of years you exit.
Sure. Unlike, something like Florida where you're just there beyond life.
So, well, they don't require you to report anymore after you're dead. So we have to give them credit for that. There are no prosecutions for failure to report after death.
I guess that's one way to look at it from a positive spin. We have talked about the I guess that's risk-based assessment. Is that the right way to word what they're moving to?
That sounds like where they're trying to go. Whether they'll succeed or not, no one knows.
And you've brought up that that's not necessarily the panacea. That's not always the best way to go about this.
It's desirable if it's done correctly. The problem is doing it correctly is very expensive, and nobody wants to do it correctly. We could probably invite the people from Oregon and to talk about that, because a risk assessment system is very expensive. Because first of all, you've got to do the risk assessment, and psychosexual evaluations are very expensive.
Couple grand, right?
Well, if you do them in the private sector, or you could create a government bureaucracy that would do them. Somebody has to do a risk assessment. So in Oregon, they decided to use the static 99, which everybody recognizes has significant flaws in the scoring of the instrumentation they use in a static 99. But once you get past the assessment, it would be kind of ridiculous to believe that everybody's going to be happy with what they get, what level they place them. I mean, it would be foolhardy to think you're going to be happy with what they come up with. Some people may be happy, some people are not going to be happy. Then the question becomes, what do we do with the people who are not happy with what they came up with?
Is there an appeal process, and how would you go about that? Right,
and that's where it gets very, very expensive. So you've got the cost of the risk assessment. Are you going to put that on the back of the offender? Well, the offenders oftentimes can't afford to pay $2,500. All right, are you going to create a government bureaucracy to pay for that? And if so, how are you going to compete with other people who are demanding funding for other things that they consider far more important? So you're all of a sudden in a fishbowl where there's a lot of people feeding at the trough of the government they hate, trying to get funding, and you're probably in the least popular category of wanting to create a new agency that's staffed with evaluators and with support staff to go out and dig up the documents. Because if you're in Arkansas, you got convicted in Oregon, they've got to get documentation together to properly evaluate you. So that's a cost that no one wants to talk about. And then if you don't like what they came up with, what do you do in terms of an appeal? Do you have an Office of Administrative Appeals? Like if a Social Security disability claim is denied, there's multiple appeals. But first you start out with a reconsideration within the agency, and the agency theoretically sends it to a different disability determination team to look at it again. Well, if you send it to a different team to look at the evaluation again, that's going to cost money. Then if they come up with the same determination and you want to appeal that, what happens next? Do you go to an administrative law judge, or do you throw this thing into a civil court system? If you go to an administrative law judge, where do they come from? They have to have a salary, and they have to have support staff to get these cases ready to be heard. It goes on and on with how complicated this is.
Right. Does any of this enter into having anything sound like double jeopardy?
No, not at all.
Okay.
The evaluation for registration, in terms of what level of risk they want to place upon you, assuming that registration is constitutional, but there's no double jeopardy about the risk assessment. But I'm dealing entirely with the cost. When people say you'd save a whole bunch of money, no, you would not save a whole bunch of money.
You would spend a whole
bunch of money is what you would do. And that's why it's difficult to get support for this. And then the money that you would save is often negligible compared to what it would be costing, because as I was going through that, I hadn't got to the point. If you have the administrative appeal, person would want to have some representation. If they're indigent, or we're going to have an indigency fund to pay for their attorney, or we're going to pay for a second evaluation to try to rebut the state's evaluation. Where's the funds going to come from for that? And if you elected the administrative law judge, are they going to be able to go into court at some point, which you can with Social Security? You can file a claim in the United States District Court. You can sue the government. I forget who you name as a defendant. I believe it would be the Secretary of Health and Human Services over Social Security. But you can file that. All this stuff costs money. And there is very little political support for doing it that way. So you end up like in Oregon with a static 99 is what they're starting out with. This is the risk assessment tool. That will benefit some people. It will harm others. It's by no means perfect. And then I don't even understand what they're going to do in terms of appellate review if you don't like that, because I think they're just cranking it up this coming year. But all these things are complicated. And the money you save would be from money that doesn't usually come from the state budget to begin with, because most states operate this hybrid model where the counties and localities are the actual funders for registering. You go down to your sheriff's office, and other than the state of Maryland, who pays a registrar like $250 a year for the duties, as far as I know, the counties pick that up. And there's only a handful of states where they do it at the federal level, at the state level, like they do in Virginia and like they do in Pennsylvania. But usually it's offloaded to the counties. So since that money is not coming from the state, it's not going to be saved because the state isn't paying it to start with.
Right. And it's just kind of masked inside of those little county budgets.
Correct. And the sheriff is not going to speak against tracking sex offenders. Most of the time they're elected. I've not lived in a state where the sheriffs weren't elected, and very few sheriffs are going to go out and say, I tell you one thing, if you elect me sheriff, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to go to the Capitol and see if we can get rid of this stupid registration. I have to track these people, and I'd rather be doing other things. And when you find a sheriff that says that, you let me know, and we'll put them on the podcast.
Maybe we should go immediately to Butts County, where they wanted to put the signs on people's lawns on Halloween, even though they weren't going to be home.
Well,
so those are probably the first examples we could use.
So yes, there are many problems with risk assessment, but in a perfect world where there was ample funding for all the moving parts, I would generally support it. But we're not in a perfect world. There's not going to be adequate funding for all the moving parts, and I'm fearful of it being done in a way that harms more people than it helps.
The only other thing was the individual, I don't recall his name, at the very beginning of the clip. And he said, well, if you're accused of one of these things, you're pretty much guilty right off the bat, right? That was the only other point from the individual.
I like what he did. Did he say tyranny? Did he mean tyranny?
Oh, he did. He said tyranny. When you have the people that are sentencing you, convicting you, and then supervising you, you have exactly what that is tyranny. But yeah, he did. I think he's in Connecticut. You can't expect them to talk, right?
That's right.
They talk funny up there.
They're the ones that go hang out by the harbor.
Yeah, they might do that. All right, here's clip number 2.
Also under consideration, a controversial change to child porn statutes that would allow leniency in cases of non-dangerous or autistic people.
Child pornography is not a victimless crime. It is harmful to each and every child it depicts.
And that the way that blended together didn't necessarily come across right. So that was a person opposed to the notion of having reduced sentencing for autistic or just someone that happens, 80-year-old grandpa accidentally clicks on some images that are of underage kids.
Well, there's a lot of debate about child porn, and it's treated very harshly, very, very harshly. And I'm not going to sit here and get a flood of emails saying that we should turn a blind eye, but it's far greater the damage that's done to the person who engaged in that versus the other way around. I'm not saying you should be looking at child porn, but putting someone in prison for 120 years, and I know of sentences. These are not imaginary sentences. They have it where they can treat each image as a count, and they'll stack 70, 80, 90 years. And the people are never going to be released. Really? Is that how you want to spend your money that you claim you're so short of and you hate taxes so much? Do you actually want to lock people up through the most expensive part of their life? Because as they get older, they cost more and more. Is that the best use of your money that you can think of?
Gotta love it. That's the system we've built. All right, and then here's the final clip. This one's about a minute long. So the third clip was going to say, the commission is also considering allowing felons on parole or suspects waiting for their day in court to still be allowed to vote. If you want to have some level or normalization of post-incarceration, then we should look at restoring voting rights while on parole, said Department of Corrections Commissioner Scott Semple. I think that's a pretty stellar statement right there, though.
I do as well. I don't understand our fear of having people vote. That I mean, there are people that have fear of voting for reasons I don't want to go into podcasts, but merely having made a transgression. Do you think Martha Stewart should be disallowed from voting? I mean, I don't know.
Absolutely.
Depending on
she
where
should be
lives.
forced to spend life in prison and bake cookies.
But do you think that after you've made a transgression in life, that you should not be ever reintegrated fully into society? And that's one of the things that makes a person whole, when they can go out and say, I did wrong. Now I'm a taxpayer and I'm taking part. I'm voting for people on the school board. I'm watching these elections. I'm trying to be a full citizen. And I just don't understand the desire to disenfranchise people for forever and ever because of a mistake they made. And
isn't that what the Boston Tea Party was about? Was taxation without representation?
I think that had something to do with it. I've heard that said before.
Come on, man, you were there.
Well, it was actually the year I was born.
All right. And the final little quote out of the article is, there's a proposal to erase police and court records after a certain time period if a case gets dismissed or a person is found not guilty. And there's a proposal not to let time behind bars factor into the 15-month window where a parent's legal right to their child can be terminated. That's something that we covered just a little bit earlier tonight.
Well, I like the erasure of records. That's something, and we're going to have to come to grips with in our Western societies. Europeans have already begun to address this as the right to be forgotten, because, as we've said, through going back 30 podcasts, when you committed a crime 25 years ago, it stayed in that local jurisdiction and there was no interlinking. But now with the modern sharing of files, everything's digitized and everything follows you wherever you are. You can't move from Georgia to Washington and get a new start because it remembers you when you're in Washington. And,
no doubt.
What is that? MyLife.com. You can go to it and you can find out what people's reputation score is, and they charge you a bunch of money if you want it suppressed. If you don't want to, right. Otherwise, all that stuff is available. And so we're going to have to come to grips with that. The other part of that, though, is that the business community will fight back with tooth and nail. That's going to be a tough one because they argue that we need that information to make sound employment decisions, and we're liable for bad hires, and you can't withdraw the information from us and then hold us liable. And they have somewhat of a valid point there, that if we're going to be responsible for negligent hires, we have to have information. So at some point we have to balance those and make sure that if we're going to take the information away from them, that we remove the liability that they might have from a negligent hire. If I'm running an apartment community and I hire someone who's was Spider-Man breaking into apartments and he did it 20 years ago and that was beyond the scope of what I'd be able to see, then if I can't see it, I wouldn't know that Spider-Man had those tendencies. And so I can't be held liable. So they do have a valid point in terms of their liabilities, but they're going to push back tooth and nail.
And I had similar thoughts about this. See, you brought up that I was in the Navy, but I was also in the Army. I was a very confused person. And I worked
you can say that again.
No doubt. It hasn't changed much either. And I worked in the orderly room, and when I was over in Korea, I had to produce like a monthly report to say how many people had received awards. And this was to make sure that the unit was distributing awards equally across various races. And I thought that it was really interesting. If you know you're being watched, you're going to then do what would be like affirmative action kind of things. Oh, well, maybe this guy really, really did deserve it, but he's of the wrong persuasion. So we're going to have to give it to this person who's of a minority, and maybe they kind of deserved it, but not as much. But we have to do this because we need it to look like we're balanced. On the flip side of that, as if it were like a double blind study, for it to be honest and accurate, the people can't know that it's happening. And this is the same thing here that you would, God, I've like completely lost my whole train of thought. It just went out the window. I don't even remember what we were talking about. What happened?
Lost your mind, Andy.
I know. But my whole, about forgetting. If you want people to be treated equally, then the people couldn't know about the history so that they get a fair shake. But at the same time, you need to make an educated decision. That's what that was all about.
Well, I'm glad that you had a senior moment and you recovered from it.
Maybe. I don't think my whole point got across. I think I lost it somewhere in the midstream. Hey, let's talk about Senator Orrin Hatch. Is he bringing snowballs into the Senate chamber again?
I haven't heard that.
Do you know that he did that?
don't recollect that, but he did bring a child porn victim assistance bill that got signed into law by the president.
Oh, this president, the current one?
Yes.
All right. Tell us about this bill.
And I haven't reviewed it in great detail, but what I can tell you is that what I say about International Megan's Law, the Adam Walsh Act in 2006, the Jacob Wetterling Act, the Megan's Law, if you don't stop this stuff from getting to the president's desk, they will sign them. Regardless of whether they're Democratic or Republican. This bill apparently requires mandatory restitution for these possession cases. And the senator introduced legislation alongside Senators Dianne Feinstein, got a lot of that bipartisan support that you're so proud of. Amy Klobuchar, Democrat, Chuck Grassley, Republican, John Cornyn, Republican, and Pat Toomey, Republican. They recognize the unique kind of harm by people who view this to the victims, and the judges in the federal system will have to order mandatory restitution on top of all the other stuff you have to deal with already. It received unanimous support, like these types of bills are destined to. And when it got to the president's desk, he wouldn't have known there was any problem with it. He would have been told, well, it passed with unanimous bipartisan support. And President Trump, just like President Obama, is not going to go into the dark bowels of the basement of the White House and say, well, I know it passed with bipartisan support, but there's got to be something that's being overlooked here, and I'm going to find out what it is. Therefore, he signed it. That's what happened with Megan's Law. That's what happened with Jacob Wetterling. That's what happened with the Adam Walsh Act. After Senator Kennedy, the late Senator Kennedy, not the one that's still alive today, but the late Senator Edward Kennedy, stopped his filibuster, that bill was passed nearly unanimously and signed by President Bush. If you don't want these things to be signed into law, you've got to stop them from getting to the president's desk, because they're going to be signed otherwise.
And that's where, like, the parliamentary maneuvering, that's the term you used earlier?
Yes, that's what was on International Megan's Law. When the Senate was under Democratic control, the committee process was under Democratic management, and they would not let this bill make it to the Senate floor for a vote where it would have passed. But through maneuvers that chairmen have, chairpersons as they are called these days, through that process, they kept it off the floor, and therefore it didn't get a final vote. If it gets a final vote, it is going to be passed. Everybody is going to sign up for it. They're not going to want this to be used against them in a campaign. And that's what happened on this. And like I say, the president signed it because as far as he knew, there was nothing wrong with it. Nobody told him that there was anything wrong with it. So,
and another example, I think, is I'm not sure if all states do this, but in this state, there's like a crossover day. So if you can derail it so that it doesn't make it to when they have to pass the paperwork over to the other side of the house, that's another way to derail a bill.
In states like Georgia, that's a great technique. For those who don't understand crossover, a bill can start out, if a senator introduces it, it's going to be a Senate bill, and if a House member introduces it, it's going to be a House bill. If it's a bill, it's not a resolution or something else. But if it's not a memorial or resolution, it's going to, what it needs to go to the other side, except in Nebraska where they have a unicameral. Well, in Georgia, there's a date in the session, which is so many days into the session, where if it hasn't crossed over, and Georgia's not the only one, then it dies. So if you can work the machinery long enough to keep it from crossing over, then it dies. Now, there are other ways to get around that. You could also take what was in the bill that didn't cross over, and you can put that on as an amendment as something that has crossed over, and you can keep it alive that way. That's how the Texas people got their small town. The bill that they had worked so hard to kill was
called a rider, right?
Right. They did a floor amendment, and so you're not out of the woodwork if you keep it from crossing over. But that's your first maneuver that you can do in states that have that. We don't have that here. It can cross over here in the final hours. It doesn't matter. But in states where they have that, that's what you need to be cognizant of that, and you can kill your legislation, and then you have to be on guard for an amendment for something that has crossed over, because they can put what died as an amendment in legislation that's already moved over to the other side of the rotunda.
Isn't Nebraska the state with the 12 people? What do they do? Isn't that the place that has just the one chamber?
Yes, they have the unicameral, the only one. They have 49 elected lawmakers, and they refer to them all as senators.
So 100% of the state is a senator.
You have no House member there. You have a senator, and you have 49 divided by 200,000. So each one represents approximately about.
There's not 200,000 people. No, there's not. There's not that many people that live in Nebraska. I don't believe it.
So,
but what do they do? I mean, what would be something equivalent in that state?
Well, they have a different system altogether. I don't understand completely, but they have priority bills that are assigned. Each member gets to designate so many bills as a priority. They're guaranteed that those will be heard, and each committee gets so many priorities. And then if you can keep it from getting priority status, that's one way of derailing it. But the other process would be in the committee that's assigned to that they don't just take things directly to the floor for a vote. So if you can derail it in the committee process, and I don't know if they give multiple committee assignments the way we do here, but ours is designed to make it very slow because they're going to go through 4 committees as a general rule here.
You've shared that with me too, and I guess just bringing that back around, instead of a crossover day or something like that, you can keep it from getting out of the committee. You've even talked about having these relationships and going back and having conversations with people using the phone and whatnot. But you can have a relationship and say, hey, look, can you not bring this to any the committee? Can it not make it out of committee somehow? You can pull strings, right?
Or you can just try to buy a few days. You could, if you have a good enough relationship, if a chairperson of a committee will give you a few days, the clock is running. And if he says, well, I was going to schedule that Wednesday, say, can you put it off to Friday? Oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. Well, you just bought yourself 2 days. And
2 days to do what? Burn the place down? What are you going to do in 2 days?
You diminish the odds it's going to go through all the hoops it has to go through.
Okay.
If it's in its first committee, and it's got to go through the other chamber, so it's a House bill, and it's going to have to go through the House Consumer and Public Affairs Committee, and then it's next to Judiciary. If you can buy yourself 2 days before it makes it to Judiciary, then you've shortened the distance of time they have to work with, the people that are promoting the junk. And then you can do the same thing again and again, because it's got multiple steps to go through. So it has to be introduced on the Senate side once it passes the House. So if you don't derail it, then you do the same process all over again. You keep it from being. Once it passes its committees, it has to be read out on the floor and voted, called up for a vote. So the House calendar is under whatever party is the majority. They're running the calendar in terms of when they call things up for a vote. Something that's going to be debated for the full maximum amount of time. You may tell the management that this is going to be controversial. It's going to be 3 hours worth of debate, which is what we allow for a House bill. And you may convince them not to call it up today because he's got too many things that they want to move over to the Senate today. And you bought yourself another day. It's all about time. When you don't have a full-time legislature, every day that you can keep something from moving is a victory. Because you reduce the odds of it making it to the finish line. And I tell people, we're generally in the killing business. We're generally not in the passing business.
Right. We are not on offense. We are still on defense.
Yeah. I don't make the rules. That's just the reality of the situation. We don't have a whole lot of people wanting to sponsor things to help us. We do have a whole lot of people who want to sponsor things to hurt us. So we're generally in the killing business. And every time you can buy yourself a day or two, it matters, unless you're in a full-time assembly. But very few of our states have a full-time assembly. But in most instances, buying time is a great thing because you wreck their train, and that's what you want to do.
I still don't quite understand why a mutual friend has the philosophy that you don't want to be doing any of this work in the legislature. You just want to do it all in the court system. I still can't quite wrap my head around that concept.
I can't either, so I can't answer for that mutual friend. But I would guess it's not understanding the process as well as one should, and it's an intimidating thing when you don't understand it. I've been going to the building since the 1980s and asking questions and sitting through and getting to know people, so I'm quite comfortable in the process. I doubt if you drove to Atlanta, you'd be comfortable in your first season or two there of being in the building and trying to figure out how how the machinations work. But I love it. If I can wreck their train, I do. I wreck as many trains as I possibly can.
This is just your sport. This is just what you get off on.
Yes. Well, I know that they will not stop coming for us.
Right.
So all we can do is continue to wreck their train and offer to work with them on reasonability. They don't have the capacity in this state to be reasonable under the current administration. It could get better in January. It could not get better. We'll have to find out. But all I can do, since they won't work with us to be reasonable, is to wreck their train. And that's what we've been doing for about 10 years now.
But you're one state, and, forgive me, I'm not trying to put you down. You're not a prevalent state. You're kind of a minority state. I don't, you know what I'm saying? You're not a Texas. You're not a Florida. You're not one of those like high profile states.
Everything I do could be replicated, but it
I don't discount that part of it, but you are just one state, and you're not on a national floor. You're not going state to state to state. You're just one state that has, I think your population's similar to Nebraska with like 45 people.
Well, I could go to these states if they can compensate for the cost, but yes, but we get back to the thing about the offenders won't donate, and we have not been able to find a non-offender source that thinks this is a high priority that they want to fight for. And
totally understand.
As long as the offenders believe someone else should do it, it doesn't get done.
To just speculate for me, if you would, there was at the conference, there was a lobbyist there. I don't want to throw her name out there. How much do you think she got paid? Not to be at the conference, but how much do you think she gets paid as a lobbyist?
Oh, they get paid tens of thousands of dollars.
Just for that one customer. So she could be easily making 150, something along those lines.
Making six-figure income as a lobbyist, absolutely. Particularly in a state like Ohio, where they're in session law, she could easily be making. You could make 100,000 here, where we only have short sessions. So comparatively to Ohio.
Yeah, I have to think that having the ability to grease those wheels and literally drive policy and make changes, having having traffic cameras, or we want to drive on the left side of the road instead of the right side of the road. I mean, you can drive those policies and make those changes and make the society what you want. That would be a very expensive process. And that's why the Koch brothers, they're bazillionaires, and they are donating these monies to direct policy to make the world the way that they want it.
Absolutely. And that's what we were talking about with the GEO group, with the $270,000 campaign to the Political Action Committee of the former Senate president. The outgoing senator, it's not still in office, but yeah, that's those people. Go ahead.
Well, people say that, our Congress is all bought and paid for, but perhaps true, but it's not just by corporations. If you're just politically connected, if you're just a cool dude and you can rub elbows with Mitch McConnell, and he would just be favorable to you, and now you're directing policy just because you're scratching his back in some other way.
The reality is that in politics, there are very few people who are politically connected without being able to bring something to the table.
Agreed.
If you're a sanitation worker and you don't do anything political, your access is going to be a lot more restricted.
Certainly.
To you. To you. Now, you can get access by a number of ways. You can donate to their campaign,
right?
Time or money, or both.
Right.
You can serve you can get elected to your state central committee, which I serve on, and King Alexander serves on in Louisiana. You can do those type of things, and then you're one of a few hundred that they need to consider because of your being willing to be politically active. But if you're just a nobody, yes, you are a constituent, and some people try really hard to be responsive to their constituents. But you're going to have a lot more access if you're doing something that brings yourself to their attention. And that's what I've been doing for 30 years. I didn't magically become politically inclined just because of sex offender registration. I have been advocating for decades about things, and people in that building have been around for decades. Remember that. I've fought tooth and nail against the state lottery. We eventually got it, but for about 10 years, we were successful in keeping a state lottery out. And boy, that should generate some emails. Why are you against the lottery?
Why don't you want people donating $1 and getting $100 million in return?
Well, I don't mind them doing it. I just hate for the state to be doing it.
I don't.
But I did that. I've advocated for disability. They were trying to whack out disability programs here. I've been a housing advocate. I mean, I've done so many things that's not just about sex offender registration. Too many of our people are one-dimensional. I hate politics. Yep. I don't care about public policy. And then they go in and they want to be listened to on this one issue. When you're a public policy junkie and you care about fairness and things that I've cared about through the ages, it makes a difference in terms of how they receive you. I'm on the train right now trying to get a minimum wage increase. We haven't had one for a decade now. I'm for that. And I will put some energy in this coming session into trying to come up with a minimum wage that won't destroy all life as we know it, but will actually be a meaningful increase, because I don't buy into it'll destroy all life as we know it. But there are people who take that position that if we were to raise the minimum wage that's been stuck since 2009, that all life as we know it would end, the economy would collapse. But I will be spending some energy this session working on that issue. That resonates with people in the political circles that you want to be connected with. You're going to get more sympathy for our cause from liberals. Liberals are going to be more likely in favor of the minimum wage. So if you swallow some of your pride and go work on something that's really not a high priority to you, you gain more credibility with them.
Right.
Because they say, okay, you're going to help me with minimum wage. I'll help you on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. I'm with you. I do understand that. I do. It's almost like paying it forward.
Yes. And I've been doing that for a long, long time. And the thing about the caravan, I think I won't name them, but a leader called me and asked me would I sign a letter that was going to New Mexico a governor's office about the caravan. I looked at it and I said, I don't know who wouldn't sign that letter. I mean, the people that are coming here, they're not all criminals and thugs and hooligans. They're coming here because they're fleeing all sorts of horrible violence and unrest in their countries. Yes, there may be some hooligans in there, but that's what vetting's for. But I would like for those people to be treated fairly and given a process, an opportunity to go through what we've agreed to have opportunities for asylum for those who make application through the process. So I said, how could you not be interested in that? I'm not ready to tell everybody that's seeking asylum to go home. And what was his name? Cleveland Bundy. He just made a statement, the arch conservative that took over and shot up the place. Remember a few years ago out in Oregon, I believe it was, that took over the federal building.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
Well, he said the same thing I'm saying, and he's far right politically, but he said, we have obligations to be fair with these people. And so
we actually have international treaties if they claim asylum, they're seeking asylum. There's international treaties that we have to take them. And do something with them and vet them.
Yes, we have to do that, and I'm in favor of honoring those obligations. I signed the letter. Well, that bought me a little bit of respect from that person, because it was an issue that doesn't affect me directly. I probably won't be having to apply for asylum in America, but I care about the people who do.
Of course, because it's humane.
Yes.
You're not just scared of them because they're brown?
No, I don't have that fear.
I'm scared of the brown people. Just kidding. Don't send me those emails. Larry just kidding. Larry, we've had great growth this year. We've done an awesome job, I think, of this podcast. It's December 10th that we're recording this. This will come out on the 11th, I believe, because I won't get your file until the morning. But I do want to thank our listeners and our growth, and I want to wish us a super duper happy 2019, which we're still going to have another episode or two, but I want to make sure that this gets said. But from that, how can people help the podcast grow?
Well, the easiest way to help it grow is to sign up for $1,000 a month contract. Oh, did I say? No, I didn't say that.
Wow, that would be awesome, though. We would be your best friends. We would come and help lobby for you in your state if you did that.
I don't think anybody's going to be doing that, but they can. What is it they do? They go to registrymatters.co.
That is correct.
That's one way, and then if they want to contact us to blabber, they can old-fashioned way. We haven't gotten any phone calls to play lately.
Nope.
747-227-4477.
I tried to get one of our listeners to do it tonight. He was just like, I don't want to be on your. I don't like my voice being on the air. I was like, all right.
Well, I'm going to contact a guy that has contacted us about the international wanting to go back to Canada. He's a dual citizen, and see if he wants to be on the podcast, because I'd like to explore that a little bit, but I haven't had a chance. But they can reach us directly if they want to contact us at registrymatterscast@gmail.com, or they can go sign up for the podcast at Patreon. Oh, it's at Patreon. What is that? www.patreon.com Registry Matters.
That is correct. And if you want to listen to the show, you could sign up at Discord. There's a link in the show notes. Also, there are people that do not know how to listen to podcasts. Go find a podcast app and search inside the podcast app for Registry Matters, and it just shows up on your phone and you press play. It's easy peasy.
When you say app, now let's say my brother, he has a flip top phone. Now he wouldn't have any apps on his phone, would he?
That's not going. Well, they do have apps, but I don't think playing Snake is going to qualify for this. That's a little bit old.
Okay.
Is he in prison, and did it come in by a suitcase mechanism?
If you have a flip phone, probably not going to listen. You're not going to have a podcast app, likely.
No, probably not. Probably not. It's going to have to be a phone that was released in the last 10 years.
So if you have an Android or an iPhone, you should be able to do that.
Easy peasy.
And
that's the easiest way to do it.
And I have people who say they love listening to the YouTube. So how do they do that? Do they just register? Subscribe? Not register. Subscribe on YouTube.
You can, just youtube.com and /Registry Matters, because we did that whole campaign to get over 100 listeners to get the name channel. Yeah, and that also then does closed captioning for you for that we do. I know we have a listener who has a hearing impairment, and he likes to have the podcast with a little scrolling words that go underneath it. And then someone reached out from an educational facility. I want to say it was Harvard, maybe, and wanted to make sure that the transcript was out there. So I also do a transcript. It is not perfect. It's an automated system that's free, and it works for me, and it gets you pretty damn close.
Well, that you can also tell it to do an alert. You can click on the bell, and that comes out your YouTube video.
That is correct.
That you have. I've learned that because I've hit the bell, and I have these things popping up that I want to see as soon as they're released.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that subscribe button.
And who would have ever thunk of it?
A couple guys, and then about 10 years ago, they sold it to Google for $1 billion just to be able to upload some videos. They receive 400 hours of content per minute.
Wow. Well, I was just telling my young man that works here, 20 years old. Of course, he takes all this for granted. And I was getting a huge file ready to give to an attorney. I mean, we're talking about a huge file. I mean, multiple folders, probably. Okay. Several thousand pages of documents. And I said, in the old days, now not that old of days, but in the old days, we would have been slaving and copying all this stuff and tried to organize it in some fashion to deliver it to the other attorney across town or across the state or wherever. I said, we're just putting these in nice little folders, and then we're going to share the file. And the attorney's going to sit there and look at that. And whether the attorney was in town or whether they're across the country or across the globe, they could look at these files. And I said, isn't this amazing? Of course, he's grown up with it. It's not amazing to him. It's just normal. But to imagine copying those thousands of pages of files like we used to do, I'd still be copying right now.
I'm with you. And that was a big business back in the day. It was like a litigation reprographics kind of place that could make those kind of copies for you.
Well, that's exactly what we would do. We would, when we had a massive amount of files, we would turn the files over to a copy file service, and we would have them paginate it and organize it similar to what we did, and then we would turn the file over. I mean, but in-house, you just didn't have time to do that. But in-house, I was able to load these thousands of pages. It took me some time, but I was able to load all these pages into a shared folder, and that's the preferable way. It's just the marvel of technology of what we're doing. It's hard to imagine what comes next, but there are things coming next that we can't imagine.
Absolutely. Well, let's shut this down so that I can go to sleep. I am exhausted. It was a really long day yesterday and a lot of snow.
Oh, all right. Well, we should be back to regular schedule this weekend.
I believe so. Take care, Larry. Right. Thank you as always.
Thanks. Bye.